Man, at this point, I'm not even 100% sure I should call these reviews anymore, because what am I reviewing? What about these videos says to you, hey, AJ is reviewing this episode? I'm just talking about it. I'm just talking about the episodes at this point. Right? Like, this is probably the one episode out of this latest run of episodes that I was going to have some issue with, if I was going to have an issue with any of them, because content warning for talk of physical and emotional abuse. But man, they handled this so freaking well. This is our big Golden Guard character episode that we all knew was coming, right? He's an interesting enough character. Obviously, he's going to get some kind of development. When we first saw him, he was just a fun villain with an entertaining personality. And if he had just stayed that, it would have been enough. But this episode takes him and transforms him into something so much more deep and layered. Because someone watching this episode without really thinking about it that much might think that this is the first Owl House episode that's not like a big event or something that doesn't have a B-plot. But like even like the season 1 finale, it still had a B-plot. The Lilith stuff in that one, prior to when she teamed up with Luz, was the B-plot, right? But you might look at this episode, which focuses on Luz, with asides to the villains, mostly the Golden Guard, whose name we find out is Hunter in this episode, and think that it doesn't have a B-plot. But if you think about it for even a second, you realize that the B-plot was given to Hunter himself, which means he is officially a protagonist now. And while it is entirely possible for an antagonist to flip and become a protagonist of your show for a little while, there was an episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I can't remember the title. It's one where they're at the beach. It might have just been called The Beach. I don't remember. But in that episode, Azula is one of the protagonists. She'd never really been a protagonist before in the show, but she is a protagonist in that episode. She's not a protagonist of the series overall, but for that episode she was. But the way they frame Hunter's story in this one, it doesn't feel like this is going to be a one-off. It feels like he's just another protagonist in this show now. Because up to this point, B-plots have only been given to the core 3 characters of Luz, Ida, and King, and their immediate group of supporting cast. That being Luz's classmates, the core ones. Amity, of course, is counted in that. And like Lilith and maybe kind of Hootie, too. But he's more of an accessory in other people's plots most of the time. But now the Golden Guard of all people, the quote-unquote main villain of the 2nd season, is one of those people too. He's a Zuko, guys. And based on this episode alone, and I know I'm not hedging my bets super well saying this, but based on this one episode alone and how they handled things, I feel like he's going to turn out to be a really freaking good one. This episode actually opens on Belos with the Golden Guard present, of course, and bringing in the various Coven leaders, and this is where we get to see that shot in the trailer properly. He brings them all in to show them a vision of the Day of Unity, and it looks like the people who were theorizing that it is literally a merger of the 2 realms were spot on, because in this episode we find out that Belos' entire family, that he is the descendant of a family that doesn't have natural magic consistently. Like, sometimes they'll get it, but for the most part they're born without natural magic. That's why he has to use technologically based magic, and seemingly, this is still speculation at this point, but seemingly why he has apparently altered himself to be able to channel the Titan directly. Because we see in this one he does have a monster form. We got hints that he did in that trailer, but we see it definitively here. We don't see the monster form, but we're 100% sure at this point that it's him. And I think what ended up happening was he tried to give himself natural magic, but ended up giving himself this monstrous form that is slowly taking over, much like Ida and Lilith's curse. But instead of using an elixir to stave it off, he has to use a Palismen juice, or whatever you would call it. But at the same time, he also seems to blame wild magic for him and Golden Guard Hunter being the last remaining members of his family. Hunter is his nephew. And Palismen creation is, I guess, wild magic. It's a holdover of wild magic. So it's unclear exactly what's happened here, but there aren't enough of the trees that are used to create palismens anymore. Whether it's because he literally doesn't allow them to be made in great numbers anymore because he's so against wild magic, or he's just using so many palismens that they literally can't grow enough to satiate him anymore, even using magic. And this is all conveyed to us in just a couple of scenes, as is the entire emotional dynamic between Bellows and Hunter. They are apparently the last members of their family. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but at the very least, Hunter thinks that it is. And Bellows took him in. And Bellows is very heavily emotionally manipulative towards this person. Hunter feels like he owes Bellows something for just helping him out as a member of his family and, not leaving him to die, right? Which he doesn't, right? But Bellows knows this, and it's clear that he's leveraging it to control Hunter, along with threats of physical violence. Because if you look at Hunter's face without the mask on, you can see he's got a scar on one side of his face and a chip out of his ear. And, he is the head of the Emperor's Coven or whatever at this point. That could just be evidence of injuries that he sustained during his training or whatever. It seems like he was kind of at a disadvantage for a while at least, until he got his artificial magic staff, right? So it makes sense he would have pushed himself super hard. But there's a scene where Bellows, seemingly trying to use his, I'm just going to call it a curse at this point, his curse as an excuse for it, lashes out at Hunter with this spiky tentacle thing, and it goes right over his shoulder, right past the side of his face. And it was suspiciously close to that place where Hunter has that scar on his cheek. And I think the scar and the chip out of his ear are evidence that Bellows has physically abused him. And I don't think the show's ever going to acknowledge this. I think it just dropped it in there for us to pick up on if we understand this kind of stuff enough to pick up on it, to add a little bit more spice to the dynamic between these characters. So, just in a couple of scenes of Hunter trying to help Bellows as his symptoms reemerge, and Bellows threatening him with violence and manipulating him emotionally, we understand everything we need to about these characters. Hunter cares about his uncle, feels like he owes his uncle, and Bellows is, even if he does also care about Hunter in his own twisted way, is taking advantage of that. He's taking advantage of that emotional connection that they have. Just like 2 scenes, man. And it adds so many more layers, not only to Bellows, a character who's been in this show for a long time at this point, but also Hunter, who we don't know much about yet. And yet it doesn't feel like we're rushing to learn things about him. All of this feels like it was conveyed perfectly naturally. And I absolutely love that they even take the opportunity here to drop a hint that Hunter is interested in wild magic, because he starts to suggest that there might be wild magic that he's read about that could help Bellows. And Bellows dismisses it because he hates wild magic that much. And later in the episode, as the episode progresses, it becomes clear that Hunter is interested in wild magic, in that more obscure form of natural magic even than what other witches practice. And that's going to be Luz and the other main characters' way in and to redeeming this character. I'm 100% sure of it. Like, at first, I can see him pursuing wild magic more directly against Bellows' wishes to try to help Bellows, but in the end, he's going to come to have an appreciation for it, and that's going to create a connection between him and the other characters, and he's going to end up being redeemed and siding with them. Like, it's already mapped out. It's clear it's going to happen in some form or another, on some sort of time scale. It's the fact that we don't know specifically how it's going to happen or what that time scale is that's so exciting, because this show is so good at playing with our expectations and then doing something not completely different, but like different enough and yet still what we expected enough that it's like peak satisfying. Like, it's hard to explain. The show does this a lot. There'll be something, you know it's coming, and you expect it to happen. You expect it to reach a certain point, and it does, but the ride is still so great that it feels like your expectations have been subverted when they haven't, right? Meanwhile, as all this is happening, Amity has decided to stay home, seemingly to avoid Luz, so we don't get any resolution of the kiss from the end of last episode, which was very unfortunate, but it would have really bogged this episode down to try to include it here, so I understand why they decided to wait. But in the meantime, the kids at Hexside are getting their Palismens. But because those trees are so rare, and therefore they can't carve their own, Bat Queen is coming in with a bunch of the Palismens she took in, which is such a great way of following up this character and showing how much Ida has her trust and how much Luz has gained her trust since their encounter. She comes in with a bunch of the Palismens she took in so that the kids at Hexside in Luz's class, like Luz's grade, I guess, can try to match with them and adopt them. The thing is, though, when you bond with your Palismen, you have to bond over something that you genuinely desire. And I guess that's how it would work as you were carving it too. You'd have to kind of keep that in mind as you were carving it too. But here, the kids have to step forward and declare what it is that they truly desire. And then the Palismen best suited to helping them achieve that would step forward and bond with them. And in an equally succinct and brilliant bit of character building for Luz, as what we got for Bellows and Hunter earlier, she's not able to bond with a Palismen because she doesn't know what she wants. She doesn't know what she wants from this. And the entire basis of all of this was just that she wants to be a witch. And she technically is at this point. But she doesn't know anything more specific than that. She doesn't have any greater life ambitions or goals. And so now they've added this little bit of extra uncertainty to the character while also setting her on the path to figuring out what it is that she wants from all of this. Where she wants to take her life going forward. And there is one aspect of this episode where they do subvert your expectations, and I think it works pretty freaking well. There's this little cardinal Palismen that seems to be a very free-spirited little guy, and he's kind of following Luz around for a while anyway, right? And so you think that by the end of the episode, she's going to have figured out what she wants, and he's going to bond with her and become her Palismen. But no, instead, after she goes to take him home, after he followed her home and ends up staying with the other Palismens, I guess she was just going to stay there overnight. I don't know exactly what she was going for, because she seemed pretty settled in by the time this happened. She's there when the Palismens in their little habitat, still sitting out in the Grudgeby court at Hexside, are snatched up by an airship piloted by the Golden Guard, who is trying to find Palismens for Bellows, because as I mentioned earlier, they can't get them normally anymore, at least not in the quantities that Bellows needs. This is literally the only thing he can think of, which makes me think the Bat Queen must be intimidating enough that they won't just go and raid her territory directly. They had to take advantage of this rare opportunity where some of the Palismens she usually guards were out in the open. And Luz and Hunter fight a little bit. The airship ends up crashing. And Kikimora is also after him. She's trying to get him killed. But for the most part, that felt like it was set up for stuff in the future and was kind of tangential to this episode, right? I'm going to talk about more of the dynamic between Luz and Hunter. That's what's important here. Though it is worth noting that Kikimora being there, it gives them a common enemy. They can't let her return with the Palismens and take credit for it. That would be bad for the whole politics of Bellows' court. And also, Luz just doesn't want her to take the Palismens back to Bellows in general. So they team up to stop her, to prevent her from returning to Bellows with the Palismens. And they bond. They end up developing an almost sibling-esque dynamic that's actually kind of adorable. And throughout most of the episode, Luz has Hunter's staff. She managed to snatch it away from him when she knocked him out of his own airship in a pretty spectacular fashion. And so she realizes immediately that he can't do magic without it, and starts to piece together what's going on. So he just tells her that he doesn't have magic without the staff. But that means she can keep hold of the staff, and he's effectively helpless. He's still another body to help her accomplish things, but he's effectively helpless. There's nothing he can do without her. So they need each other. And it's during this time that they bond. Luz uses her unique brand of magic, and he's genuinely interested in it. And when it comes time for her to give him the staff back so they can act against Kikimora, and they succeed, he has the chance to betray her, but he doesn't, instead revealing his name to her and going home empty-handed by choice, showing that in his heart he is a good person. And it seems that whatever it is that he wants to accomplish, whether it be helping Belos or deep down something more, it was enough to attract that little Cardinal Palismen, because it follows him home and becomes his true witch's staff. And now that poor little birdie thing is in so much danger because it's in the palace with Belos, who eats Palismens. Like, now I'm like, it's so cool that he got this thing and that they pulled that 180 on us, giving it to him instead of to Luz. And I am sure that having access to this thing, and therefore this tangible reminder that wild magic is a factor in their lives and that he could be pursuing it, is going to propel his characterization forward. But I'm also so worried for this new character who has been introduced and is quite likable. He followed Luz and Hunter around throughout their entire little misadventure, and I like him a lot. And I'm so afraid they're going to kill him off. It's making me very anxious. And in the end, the thing with Luz isn't resolved. We don't know where her storyline is going to go in this regard. Like, she's still Luz throughout this entire episode. She's still got her big heart. She's still got her quick wits. It's not like this knowledge that she's not sure what she wants to do with her life is dragging her down at all. But it is this thing that's going to loom over her character until it's resolved. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how they have that affect her and when. And in the end, in one of the most touching moments of this entire show so far, in another noodle incident comparable to the one where Luz went through those various unseen trials to get Amity her job back, Ida and King went and stole enough wood from one of those, I can't remember what they're called, the Palismen trees, so that when Luz is ready, she can carve her own. This show is just this is such a good show. Like, I was genuinely worried. Like, I thought it was pretty obvious that there was going to be some sort of abusive relationship between Belos and the Golden Guard, because he is very clearly a kid, right? Like, not like a teenager. Not like a kid. He's a teenager. But you get my point. I thought that's where they were going with it. And I was a little worried, because while I'm going to use Steven Universe as an example. Promise I'm not turning into an auntie. While I love Steven Universe, there are some relationships in that show that I feel are treated a little flippantly that shouldn't be. And so I was worried that this show might treat this relationship between Belos and Hunter the same way. And it doesn't seem like it is. It doesn't seem like they're pulling any punches at all. If they're being a little vague here and there about some of the specific details of their relationship, it's just for the sake of little kids who don't need to be seeing that kind of stuff. It's still there, even if it is just subtext. And I won't say that Belos can't be redeemed, but I feel like introducing the character of Hunter to redeem instead, I feel like they did that specifically because they don't intend on redeeming Belos, and they wanted kind of a proxy main villain that they could redeem instead of him, right? I don't know, this episode, I was a little worried about it. I was expecting a lot from it, and it alleviated my worries, and it exceeded my expectations. And I don't know how better to sell it to you than that? And that's not even getting into, like, we learn a little bit more about Palismens in this episode just in general. We see, like, more of the forms they can take in the kinds of Palismens that the various students get. Basha even has a moment where I don't hate her guts. And we find out that the weird demon that seems to be controlling Bump isn't controlling him. It's his Palismen. He wears it over his head so he can share its sight because he has a damaged eye, which is such a cool little character detail and also suggests some interesting stuff about how Palismens do and or can function. It's just, like many recent episodes of this show, this one is packed so full to the brim. I'm going to have to watch it a couple more times before I've absorbed everything. And yet it doesn't feel overfull. It doesn't feel like it's too much. It's remarkable. I haven't been keeping up with what the episode titles are, so I don't know what the next episode's called. Let's go find out together, shall we? Because this is a thing that I'm interested in now. I'm that excited for the episodes anymore. Ooh, interesting. Ida's Requiem. A special witch from Ida's past enlists her in a rebellion against the Emperor, and that's that short-haired witch that we saw in the trailer with the big round glasses, who also was there as one of the coven leaders. Can't remember which one, but I'm really excited about that. I can't even express how excited I am about that. Not just because I have a lot of thoughts about this character already, but because, man, do I want to see Ida actually taking an active part in bringing this regime down. I don't know if I don't remember if I ever talked about it in any past reviews, but one thing I could say about this show is that it does annoy me a little bit that Ida is so aware of how shitty everything is, and yet she doesn't really take an active part in trying to fix anything. But you could argue that that's because reasonably she can't. But if she becomes aware that there's a whole rebellion building up steam against Bellows, maybe she'll want to get in on that, and that could be really interesting to see. Also, I just want to say here, because I don't know if everyone saw my little short update that I dropped recently, but I am holding off on my Bellows theory. I'm sorry, but seeing this episode, I'm getting the sense that not only are we actively learning about his backstory right now, that's like one of the arcs, the ongoing arcs of the show, but the stuff we did learn about him in this episode, I'm fairly certain at this point that none of my ideas are right. So I'm going to wait at least until the mid-season break before I talk about Bellows in theory form. That said, as per usual, what did you guys think of this episode of the Owl House, Hunting Palismen? I don't remember if I told you guys the title yet or not. But there you go, it's called Hunting Palismen. If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going. I just got it, because his name's Hunter. Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe. If you haven't, you can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as to the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.